Good morning, good morning, good morning. I really should and would go to the trouble of putting on some better clothes, but then I'm forced with a dilemma, aren't I? I'm like, I've got to put on clothes so I can do a live stream video on a global international publishing company. And these are like that would be the tradition of things, but it's like not forever because, people used to wear loincloths. So I guess like at least I'm not wearing a loincloth. So we've got to understand, how is our technology going to integrate to our overall civilization, like on the long run? Is it linear? So does it line off? And in that case, I'd say we're all doomed because we happen to be introducing AI at the time of, T-shirt and sneakers fashion. And so that's unacceptable in my mind. So if I'm going to wear T-shirt and sneakers, then I may as well wear a singlet. I may as well, just get used to this. I may as well just envisage that I'm one of those old-timey people writing with a quill under candlelight, and that none of this really matters because it's the substance of what I'm talking about, And I certainly wouldn't want to dress in the wrong gendered clothing, which no one could have seen because it was dark, because there was no electric light. It's never ending, the amount of things that we can apply, the amount of variables we can apply to human presentation and what it means, the shifting sand that all of these absolutely divisive arguments are being settled on. Basically what I see is look at this. Isn't this clever? This is a little catapult that little Kaylin made. Oh, very cool. There's two catapults on either side of this argument, both absolutely certain. And I'd say both, it's like, who are you seeking to get a change from? That's a question, isn't it? And basically the only person I could possibly think that you're hoping to get a change from is the psychiatrists, because they're the ones who created. Oh, that's probably spelt wrong, by the way. That's why I can't be a psychiatrist, because I have trouble spelling. Which seems silly now, doesn't it? Doesn't it seem silly? But why are we appealing to psychiatrists? Why are we appealing to psychiatrists? Like, if we think, it's like priests. Even if you think of who's the most against this, like Catholic priests, they wear dresses. Like they live a life that is completely different. This is a third tier atheist religion. And I will take responsibility because it's a trajectory from our Protestant Reformation. It's sure as hell is. It is an extension of the Protestant Reformation. That's why I went back to Catholicism, in words, in theory, because that's all it is. You can't, and I think basically what's happening is it's a tool of restriction. It's a tool of occupation. It's a tool of discrimination. It's a tool of totalitarian regimes through the lens of a technically increasing landscape constantly, which is allowed for more intervention. And that's a vicious cycle. That's a snowball like that from hell, if you could imagine such a thing, because it's like with the increased observation, but they are never going to win because they're simply not smart enough and they're not patient enough and there's too much evidence. It's like the psychiatric profession is the Titanic, and if you're on it, that's it. It's left the shore. The data that will amplify and surround you by every single religious institution, every single victim of all of this shit for a long time. This is the fucking end of the line. You're out on the fucking ocean. No lifeboats. Bobbing in the freezing fucking cold water. You've just hit a fucking iceberg, I'm going to call it the iceberg. I'm going to call the fucking iceberg reality. Because that's a word that's been thrown around. Reality. It seems like reality is about to be sinking into the psychiatric community. A momentary trespass into people's lives has an increased cohabitability, so people are living more in communion with each other. People are living under lights. People are living under media scrutiny. So we're all subject to different things that are putting pressures on us to adapt in different ways and do all these different things. Certain individuals have taken the highest ground possible in that argument. The highest human ground. They've attempted to build themselves a little fucking temple up on that mountaintop. Look down at all of us and start building their new religion. Their new religion is called reality. And it's a very strange thing because it changes all the time. Basically, anyone who would have been describing this current era 20 years ago would have been declared as insane by these psychiatrists up on their mountain claiming reality. Yet we're here. Are there repeats? No, because there wasn't documentation. Not every one of these ends up in a 10-year-long trial recorded permanently on the internet. It doesn't. No, they end up fucking, stuck in the corner of a room, drugged out of their fucking eyeballs. But still, this is where we are. So it's like this, the behavior of the majority of young people these days would have 50 years ago led you to a psychiatrist. Right. So the psychiatrists they're installed by society. They fill a created position that used to be filled by the church, but in our Protestant, desires and our atheists, because atheism is just a manifestation of Protestantism, which is so crazy. But it's like, somewhere in the end of this, it's probably all going to be necessary. It's better that we do this now. See, if we are approaching a situation now where we have 7 decades of psychiatrists basically willy-nilly experimenting on vulnerable people with a created and scientific anti-human fucking rhetoric, godless rhetoric, under the blessing of the state and literally utilized by the state to issue warnings and threats and become another level of judicial, intervention or in carceral intervention. The third tier, and invisible. That's the thing. It's like they stay. The profession itself stays, and it mirrors exactly an SS officer from Nazi Germany. I think basically if you were inclined to go into that profession, you would definitely, as I do, probably develop a type of obsession with the behavior going on in that period, because it's like the hottest time for understanding the human mind. Once you're in that from an authority position, you're almost definitely going to continue, subconsciously developing, concepts that might be a little bit too similar. And perhaps slip under the radar of your own perception and continue these experiments, but you are being surrounded. You are being ring-roaded by a technology and a societal development and tools like this that mean, rather than me, 2 days without sleep in isolation chambers with a windowless room under chemical intervention for my own safety and the nurse's safety, all of these things that have been your tools to keep the can down the road, to restrict all of these conversations, are now just very clearly and calmly speaking to you every morning. You know, it's like that. You sit every day and claim that people are out of touch with the reality. It's like, it's time to see whether, shouldn't there at least have been one or two? You know, even if I was surely I'm mirroring at least a charismatic cult leader by now. Surely I could have convinced one or two psychiatrists off the ledge of their own creation. You know, but who knows? It's not spoken about. You know, I think there was interactions perhaps between the Catholic Church or perhaps between the Anglican Church, perhaps whoever needs it. It's like, you know, I read a thing yesterday, or I watched a thing yesterday that said a specialist swordsman was brought in from France to decapitate Anne Boleyn because he had one really good swing. And I'd say that's the position of a psychiatrist, isn't it? If we think of the scenario of Anne Boleyn, we think of, and this really is prominent if you understand the birth of the Church of England and our position in things. Like you take, and it's like, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. I've been doing this for 10 years. You know, this is like, you know, I've got everyone around me thinking, oh, what's he doing? He's on side quest, mystical side quest. It's like, I was placed on a mystical side quest because people tried to use this tool to bludgeon me to death right after I'd just been tried to be bludgeoned to death. You know, it's getting very small, the stone of truth that you're all standing on. I just imagine if you're in front of me, what would look like? You know, imagine if this was a reverse, if you were Mark Zuckerberg, you know, on trial. It's like, why isn't that? The psychiatric industry literally mirrors exactly a social network. It's a global social network, an elite social network that basically told people how to live. All of the things that we've dealt with in social media that we've all dealt with now, like, you know, misinformation and censorship and all that, that's the psychiatric industry. The difference is that Mark Zuckerberg and even Elon Musk, they don't do anywhere near as much as what the psychiatric community has been doing for decades with people's real lives, not their digital manifestations. You know, it's just like, keep taking a step back. You know, prepare for the day that this is in person, documented. Facial expressions, all watching. 10 of you in a row, just watching, waiting for the flinch. What on earth are you doing? What on earth have you been doing? You know, old and young. The young ones are probably just like, I don't know, I thought I was going to get a good pair of sneakers. It seemed like a good job. Fuck, I don't know. The old ones, they don't know. They've got to know by this stage. It's similar to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, like the Pope, they knew that there's child abuse. They know about it, right? It's kind of a thing. It's like it's there. It's like, fucking hell. We've got to really deal with this as a fucking community. Now, whenever anyone deals with something as a community, it usually gets worse because there's a level of like protection. Like we're all got to protect each other, and that's very obvious under these circumstances. So this is what's going to continue. You know, really you'd think if you're a psychiatrist dealing and taking people's freedom all day, medicating people, giving them diagnoses that are lifelong, you think that one of you at least would have already fronted up to have this discussion, but you can't. It's like going into a room. You all have to go in the room together and the door isn't big enough because the door is bullshit. Yeah, it's kind of like, imagine a burger franchise that's decided they could buy dog meat and it saves them 20%, so they make 20% more, and the owner is a gambling addict or a drug addict. So he just decides no one's going to notice, put more tomato sauce on it. That's what's happening with the psychiatrists. Yeah, but it's a little bit worse. It's like, it's not like a burger, like one mouthful or a whole burger of a dog meat burger. It's like, who hasn't done that really at this stage? But having your children or your parents or your siblings or your co-workers given a fucking lifelong label that will go intergenerationally through that family and cause absolute mayhem while that person sips a latte down at the fucking cafe, just completely ignorant to the abuse and to the chaos that they're causing, completely, void of all the religious concentrated effort and attention that, say, priests get. Why? Because that was the taste of the time. You can see it in the movements of all the major religions. In the 70s, the revolution, the Vatican II. You can see a dedication to, we've got to make ourselves look more passive, look more dull, look more generic, look more like whatever, be more friendly, happy, less projecting of force, all these things. Whatever created that movement right now needs to be spoken about as if it was the moon landing, because it happened at the same time. Like, we've spoken about the moon landing and it's brought me nothing. And as always, I'll stick that on the shelf because it's too easy a target to claim anything other than absolute subservience to those amazing individuals who put man on the moon. It's kind of the funniest thing. It's like, if we're getting slowly there, most people think of this moon as like, it's this conspiracy. In my life, it's a lot different. It's a lot different. If you've got a parent under an experimental, religious thing, and then like based on a invented and very magical, because you got to understand rockets are magical. That's like, go back 200 years. It's like that's the only way you could have described that. So that, and then absolutely unprovable, that it's like a nightmare. And I want to know exactly what the purpose was. And it's silly because I'm like, well, I've seen the purpose, isn't it? Look at all the things. Look at what that religion built, And it's time, I think, to start just backing these people into a corner, just being like, right, the Pope, you stand over there. The Shah or the Ayatollah, the new one, hello, could you just stand over there? The King of England and the Archbishop of Canterbury, could you stand over there, please? Right? And then it's like, could the fucking astronaut fucking psychiatrist please enter the room? Could the rocket-obsessed psychiatrists please enter the room, perhaps wearing a jester hat with bells on it? Because it's like, you now look far more insane and odd and eccentric. Now that enough water is passed under the bridge, now that we're all just kind of like, what the hell is going on? Like, and that seems to be the race. It's a race of, it's just, and the best way to describe it, if this was an individual, so you'll notice like I am conscious of my presentations. I'm trying to just be as authentic and raw. I'm not leaning on any type of props like a nice shirt or good lighting or a suit. I'm trying to just be as raw as I can, but obviously not overexpose myself, because all of these things, right? This is what's required for me to challenge all of these authorities constantly. Right? So it's like there was a race to genericize and capture the religious experience. When that's a small group, it's called a cult. So it's like we came from that exactly happening by the Nazis. Then we moved a bunch of Nazis to build rockets. And then we doubled down again and then built it based on, without the Führer as the highest thing. We then built it on basically man's scientific brilliance. And we concentrated around that. And so rather than a priest being viewed by society perhaps with a taste for the exotic, having this youth movement of exuberance and drugs and free love and all of these things that was going on, it's like, oh, well, in that environment, the priest looks very aggressive and judgmental. The hip, unbuttoned shirt wearing psychiatrist with a box of pills in his pocket. Man, he's hip and happening. He's right on. He's right with us. Or he's adjacent, not like the priest. Yeah, and then you can just see it's like, so the Vatican tried to do shit. By the sounds of it, that meant that they let in a bunch of homosexuals, and that kind of led to just homosexuality. So it's so weird. It's like I was blaming the Pride movement on the church, especially on the Catholics a little bit. I saw the link, and then found out why the link was there, and then I was like that's something bad. And it's like there is a fringe case, but that fringe case of abuse is caused by the psychiatrists. You know, you could say there was, let's assume, 80-20 it. There's an 80% positive environmental and societal change based on the acceptability of homosexual people. Right? I would 100% credit that towards the Vatican, towards the Catholics, on their Vatican II. So it's like Vatican II brought 80% of the positive corrections towards the opinions of homosexual people and trans and queer and all of that stuff. And it's so weird they did that under scrutiny of these child. Look, and there is child abuse. There is, but it's like Vatican flavor fucking child abuse. You know what I mean? It's so they're subject to the 20% negative consequences, but then it's like that's a very complicated argument because it has to do with like age of consent and those laws. I'm not fucking getting into that shit at all right now. Right, so that will be concurrent. That will be existing in both. There will be an 80-20 breakdown even in the psychiatric of direct child abuse, and in the society of direct child abuse. It's just that the Vatican got the target put on it because they were doing the other things. And then weirdly, they've been forced to walk what it seems like through a corridor of like, they're labeled as the homophobics, yet they're the largest institution that seems to have actually like brought this thing together. It's like YMCA was the international anthem for gay men, and it's Young Men's Christian Association, right? And this is like it's like some elaborate puzzle that's been, for me, like I'm 39, right? So and it's weird because a lot of young people will be like, he's really old, but it's like I'm actually really young, and it's like the puzzle of figuring this shit out there's no one else is explaining this like what's actually going on. It's just like we're just batching out, and this is what a scientific cult would do. We're just batching out like ultimately optimistic utopian worshipping little fucking electronic obsessed drones like from a hatchery, and there's almost like a spirit of like the place we're going, we don't need our history, like we've got to put our history behind us because it's all positive. And it's like, no it's not at all. It's not all positive, and at the worst of all, it's incredibly ignorant to the recent historical changes that have caused all of this shit. And no one is speaking about the right things. No one has the right pathway. And this is why it's like you sit a 20-year-old psychiatrist opposite me. What the hell are they going to do? What on earth are they going to do? How on earth are they ever going to do anything with this? And that's the point. That's the point. They don't have like, they've been condensed down and given this kind of like this mandate to go and do the good work, right? But the good work is not good. It's not good. It's not based on a like voluntary, passed down Judeo-Christian kind of religious foundation that started with literal like, word of mouth tribal discourse. It's built in a lab. This is a lab designed religious doctrine that's band-aid solutioned its way to supremacy, but now inevitably must be ready to have its legs taken out and go on the largest decline that there's ever been. because there is nothing behind it. And it's going to, whereas like this was all taking place in the dark, this is now all in the light. Like if you think of the Vatican, if I say, like if I went to anyone and said, do you know the Vatican more than likely, the Catholics more than likely actually, you know, are responsible for the increase in stable and societally kind of not too off the chain, like respect and normalization of homosexual things. It's like that's them, and people would be like, no, that's, if you went and asked any leftist, they'd say no, that the Catholics hate gays, and it's like, no, they don't. No, they don't. They completely changed their entire fucking thing. And it actually led to too many gays, which led to some abuse of young boys. You know, and that's the thing. It's like, I can only imagine, like, it's like you stick, it's like you can't, that's a structural issue. You stick a bunch of celibate, you know, experimentally religious obsessed young gay men in a place, that's going to lead to that. You know, and it's like, that's what it's, if you took, and I think it's funny, there's like an outrage towards homosexual child abuse, right? But if you took a swathering or if you took a selection from any normal society or anything, it's like, there's just child abuse all across the fucking board. It's just that like, it's a particularly kind of observable oddity, and it's like a high level, because it's like that it just does all the things, like there is a priest who's doing this. But then we have, on the flip, is a psychiatric community that is literally like permanently sterilizing children at ages as young as 11. Right? That is, and it's like, what, down an ideology that is concentrated on sexuality at that age. And it's just the same thing. It's like that isn't like dark, shadowy, protected, like priest, you know, not accidentally, but like whatever, participating in child abuse. It's like, that's government funded, out in the open, absolute fucking child abuse. That's overt sexualization of incredibly young people in a ultra like scientifically obsessed utopian concept. It's like, it's not just, it's even worse. And it's not homosexual. So you could almost argue there, if you get the archetype of a priest, which you've got to understand, I never in a million years ever would have wanted to be a priest. Why? Because I like women too much. It's just no way. That's like, no. I as a man, a heterosexual man, I'm like, that's fucking already weird. It's like, and if the level of homophobia, it's pretty much the same. So homophobia and suspicion of priests is just the same. And then it turns out it's because they are the same, but all of that is unfounded. So it's like, if you're a fucking, and that's what's so weird, is it's like the queer LGBTQ is very aggressively against the Catholic Church, but the Catholic Church is kind of the international landing ground for homosexuals that don't want to be at a pride parade. There is child abuse, but it is, you know, most prominently homosexual child abuse. And so it seems like the way that this breaks down is there is a heterosexual obsessed scientific cult that turns young boys into women to abuse them. And then there is the Catholic Church who is the collection place unofficially of a lot of homosexual people that does lead to child abuse as well, but without modification, because they're not having to appease their heterosexuality. And that's where this seems to be going continuously, is that I think there has been, by a very masculine heterosexual culture of all over the place, it's like there is no difference. The Catholic priest, or any priest really, is just stuck direct. They're just a homosexual man. And it's like, it's hard to know where that begins and where that ends, really. It's like you're an odd person. You go and teach people about God and you wear a different thing and you're celibate, supposedly, even though a lot of them aren't. But it's like that's already a gay person. Right? So in a culture that's trying to find, liberation, and you've got to kind of draw it, like, if you understand the youth movement, it went like, there was like sexual, and this is why we're still surrounded by this. A lot of couples, the elderly couples, there's a huge proportion of marriages. Like, that's it. There's like successful marriages. Not that that's all. I don't think that's ultimately an archetype of success, really. But it is a fact that the majority of long-term marriages are elderly people, and there is a sharp decline. So there's stable, I'd say maybe elevating, like monogamy, just heading up. And then it just basically hits the youth movement and just, so you could say like divorce, just fucking went like that. And it's funny because I mentioned Anne Boleyn before, and the establishment of the Church of England. It's like that more than likely had an effect. I'd say that this moment was really, it's got to be, I think, the 1960s. Anyway, there'd also be another tick, I'd say, after Charles and Diana divorced. And you've got to understand, it's like they're under the pressure of all of this thing. So it's like this, but it's like that. The divorce is just went, like, as soon as it became socially acceptable, it went crazy because they were bombarded by sexual imagery, by sexual reinforcement. That, and I think it's very similar. It's like there are locusts or grasshoppers that you can get to turn into locusts. And I think this is kind of what happened to humans, is that with our technology, with exposure to these types of things, and then the underlying, youth explosion, that just hypersexualized humanity. And it's like, I don't really understand how that could possibly ever go away. Unless there's kind of like a, what do they call it? Is it called like it's not asymmetric. There's a word for it when it flips. But it'd be called, where there's almost like there's an oversaturation and then an info like that. There's a potential for that kind of floating around, but I just don't see how. But still, when we're left with the definition of psychiatrists, we have to now claim that they are the clergy of a sex-obsessed, atheistic, scientific space cult. And that is incredibly, that it's incredibly strange that they aren't being announced as that. This is occupying. This is a vast majority of Western states in the world are issuing this at the higher level, and I think this is kind of like this. It is the religion of the states. This is the bureaucratic religion, and I think it's pretty obvious when you think about it. If you think of bureaucracy and administration in our political class, it, especially, as we go back, it absolutely relied on discipline, order, being thorough, and being conforming to the system. The system was there was a system to keep everything in order. So if you were out of the system, you needed, but then, the thing was, it's like, you can see how they're almost like eating their own tail. People were demanding employment contracts and all of these other things, like overtime and healthcare and all of it. And I think healthcare especially. So healthcare, that's what this is. There needed to be a reason. One, if you had somebody that was being disruptive to your system, and basically the religion was to keep the system going, you needed a way to get them out, right? You couldn't go to the church anymore because you were over the top of the church now at this stage, as the bureaucracy, as the administrators. So you called it healthcare, and got a clergy of people to basically police wrongthink. And the problem is, it's like that wrongthink has a really bad habit of being spot on right, because obviously if you're interacting with a conforming, very methodical, litigious, administration system, it's pretty expectable that there's going to be some unseen consequences. There's going to be there's going to be some effects of that aren't going to be positive. And you've got to understand that all of that is experimental. The concept of managing a bunch of people in a technological renaissance, and the thing is like, on the flip, it's like they do a good job. It's just they couldn't tolerate any level of disruption. And that's what that is. That's that religion. And then somehow, what I think should have been like the counterculture movement was the group flare up. So we changed the administration with that. That had enough power. That's why that's a lot of things, right? Which good and bad. A lot of it bad, but they just overwhelmed the administrative system. But they never identified the psychiatric node in that as being a cul-de-sac, spiritual cul-de-sac it's a tool of that administration. And this is the greatest problem. It's like the minute we all realize that there is no way ethically to have an artificial intelligence speech bot, language bot, large language model psychiatrist, means that there have never been a good thing to be psychiatrists. It was used to process disruptive people. Unfortunately, disruptive people can often be misinterpreted as disruptive if they are disrupting the flow of a monotonous, homogenous, monoculture harvesting vessel, or harvesting, combine harvester that's just going through the field, making sure everything's level and doing it like that's, of course, you're going to be disruptive. It's like our failure to build administrations of bureaucracy that can accurately manage disruption. And it's like, that's the first level of a human system. That's the first level. So there is a moment where we can collectively basically go, psychiatrists are absolutely an unacceptable measure in this current period. We can't have, if you take my example, right, and you take that this is a state-based private medical or public medical system, basically, that's what it is. So this is a apparatus of the state to attempt to slow down and retard my perceived disruption, but
obviously not disruption in an environment where the other disruptions present, like the technological, the societal, the family disruptions, the chemical abuse, alcohol abuse, disruptions to my life, all of those things are now way off the chart towards this situation. But we're still left with a never-ending argument between a obsolete control mechanism of the state and an individual with the technologies. But until I get an absolute decree on this and an absolute remuneration, I can't stop and I can't do anything else. You know what I mean? And I have to delve into international politics because I have to carry with me and say that's a backwards fucking shithole out of the West Coast. They may as well be fucking eating snakes, worshipping snakes and fucking dancing with fire and fucking doing all this shit. And it's like, well, actually, come to think of it, they are doing that. So all of the things, it's like you've got to understand, the psychiatrists were used to basically, like, through our administration bureaucracy, there was a high level of Christianity. So they were used to police the Christian, ethics and belief system of our constitutional, empire, basically, of our British Empire under Protestant Christian doctrine. And that was the majority of people were like that. So they were established under that order. Then they've somehow ridden the wave. This profession has ridden the wave through the atheist explosion and through the scientific explosion. And now they're doing the opposite. Now they're mandating this woke law. And that's not the Vatican going from wearing elaborate things and speaking about, like, they changed some things. They didn't change everything. Like, if the Vatican started burning fucking goats in the middle of the fucking church, that's about where you'd have to be to explain what the psychiatrists have done. And this is where we just get to this point. It's like, so every single practicing psychiatrist in 2026 would have been absolutely declared as a insane fucking, psychotic fucking criminal 50 years ago by the same psychiatrist. And they're reading the books of those people. The thing is built on that. And you can't do that. You can't. And I think it's like, if this really is the moment, it's like the Vatican, they changed. They just waited it out. Then this is the largest, then basically that's, because there's a thing called conversion therapy, which has to do with, and I will get to one little thing on the trans phenomenon in a moment. But there's a thing called conversion therapy, which the churches have been being not prosecuted, but being criticised for, which is basically gay and trans people are exposed to religious teachings in order to shift their perceptions. And this is like, so, and it's so weird, like, they're never actively having this conversation because there isn't. And I think it's like, basically the psychiatrists know enough that if they put one single representative forward, like if you kind of think of that guy who talks about space, or even like Stephen Hawking in black holes, it's like, why isn't there that? Even the number one person you could say with popularity would be Jordan Peterson, and then he's actually a psychologist and is front and center on this. But where is the psychiatric? Where is the psychiatric, clergy in this moment? Where is the head of the psychiatric cult in this moment to have these discussions? Then they don't exist. It is just another profession that's protected under state-based employment laws and mandated, minimum wages and all of these things. That's all it is. And more than likely, unfortunately, there is an absolute glut of these hideously created people via universities. And that becomes like, when are the universities going to start refunding these people that are finishing psychiatric degrees? medical degrees, because that's going to very quickly be, it's like you're in the territory of the Iranian regime now. And if we find connections there, then it's all over. And this is unfortunately, fortunately for me, but it's like unfortunately for those individuals, especially the young ones who are just ignorant, because it takes a long time to piece all of this together. And if you're bolstered by a community and you're in an echo chamber of support and big noting, then you're never going to get this. You're going to just think that you're walking on a golden path towards your new, 2-story house and Lamborghini or whatever it is. It's like, but that is absolutely not the case. And you've got to understand, there were Catholic priests that were conspicuously wealthy. That's, there's always been this corruption mechanism with that. And so it's like the historic criticisms of the Catholic Church are now just being presented by an illegal and completely undeclared pseudo-religious state-funded mechanism called the psychiatric community. And they have no way to challenge this. Their entire diagnostic protocol is I'd say like 80 or 90% based on verbal communication, and then 10% or 10 or 20% on physical observation. It's like, well, you're doing both. And it's like, anything you're not sure about, I will fill you in. And specifically the trans thing, I'm about to get to that. And hopefully that will end this whole fucking thing once and for all. And the problem is, it's like, I can never tell whether that manifestation of that trans thing is because of the abuse, which is, that's kind of like the assumption, that is, even in your own books, you'll see that. You'll be like, oh, he's being abused by a gigantic, systematized, government-funded and societally reinforced, his entire family. Yeah, that might lead to some manifestation of this. Like, that's as purely either, in my case, I'll tell you what it is mentally. It's like, I either do that or I kill someone. And that's the fucking line you've got me on. Like, it's like that I'm being fucking tortured in the middle of a bunch of fucking crazy people. A lot of them under heavy heavy influence of drugs and alcohol. So, and you're documenting it as an experiment. It's like, yeah, fuck, that's a coping mechanism if ever I've seen one. That's the mental aspect, right? I don't know. I'll say that. What I want to do now is split the mental aspect from the physical, because I think that the physical is quite possibly, this theory is an end to all of this shit. An absolute end to all of it. And that is that if we take the very argument of that we've seen recently with trans women, so men that have transitioned to women in women's sports. Okay. I agree that shouldn't really happen, especially combat sports, but obviously every extreme example will manifest so that manifested. Okay. And that is a huge thing that is used to discriminate against trans people. But I agree. It's like, yes. So what is that? It's like you developed through puberty as a man. And this is what's so funny as well, because I think the obsession with the puberty blockers and the trans intervention on young people, I know that it's aesthetic, because you get, like, if you adjust working on aesthetics and cultural norms and things like that, you get a better result. So if you're a plastic surgeon, right, without any ethical boundaries or anything like that, if you're a purely an aesthetic practitioner, right, which is an acceptable thing for a lot of people, majoritively women, right? It's a majoritively female obsession with the aesthetic, which I have, but not to that level. And then weirdly, all trans people have to walk the tightrope of being, do you know what I mean? And increasingly, it's not just natural beauty; it's now artificial beauty, and they're already handicapped. And then so that's where you get these things. It's like if we were just working off an aesthetic boundary, then transition young with no morals or anything like that, then that you get a better result. That is how the practitioners of aesthetic modification would speak about that. Now that can hardly be, especially on a male perspective, good psychiatric or psychological advice to be obsessed with the aesthetic. So we're in some murky water there, but and that would be funny that if that's why it's like, they have to transition the young kids to legitimize the whole thing, and that is weirdly working because it's just women criticizing. So if you can't pass, then you are attacked. So it's a societally reinforced, hyper curated, hyper artificial, hyper unapproachable aesthetic standard being policed by biological women onto the handicapped trans women, which that if they basically continue on using that metric, that's what will lead to an increase in child transition. And it's like that because that's the argument that's taking place. Now, what I would say to do with my body, because I heard Sal Grover say, no one's born in the wrong body. And it's like, I am going to shift that out of a gender argument. I would 100%, I would be able to describe my physical symptoms of pain and discomfort and things that I'm finding after a head injury based on the concept of being in the wrong body. That is what it is. It's not, wasn't born in the wrong body because my body worked when I was young, but my body now is presenting wrong. It's like there is another thing in there that works better, right? And it's, for me to do it as a 40-year-old man, the only way to conceive it, and I've had to do other things. I had to relearn how to sing again. I had to relearn how to do lots of things. I had to overcome massive anxiety from a near-death experience, all of these things, and that's not great. And now I'm doing this for a long time, and this is fucked as well. But trying to do it in a responsible way as much as I can. That's why I put myself under constant scrutiny, constant surveillance to do it. It's the only ethical way and responsible way to do it. And someone that was a disassociated schizophrenic would not make those decisions. They would do whatever. That's the duty of care that I've done on society, on my family, all these things. Not that it's not been reinforced, because I'm combating the people that would critique it. And they're able to just continue their lives, their trajectory. 10 years goes past for them, nothing changes. It's like they're in an acceptable profession that's celebrated by society and by the thing. It's like that's a fucking. You want to talk about trans people in the boxing ring? It's like, you try and do this. And also, I'm not 24/7 manifesting as trans. It's just a tool that I use to rehabilitate. Now, the reason I believe that is, the reason that the body is coming into it is because if you take the example of a boxing match between a trans person and a cis person or a biological person, right? The whole thing is that the body is different, stronger and fitter and faster, all these things, because you've gone through male puberty. I go, right. So females have always had a physical disadvantage against men. That is almost the strongest differentiator between men and women. So women have always been, and this isn't like, traditionally, women are not hesitant to select a mate that is quite larger. Even in my case of my children, my children's mother is very much smaller than I am, right? So that's not how it works. Women don't select on equal physical terms. They might longer term down the track after some years, but biologically and like the instinctually, no, there can be an absolute thing. Like it's literally between my children's mother and myself. It's kind of like that. Yeah. Even like that's pretty much how her new husband and her look on profile. And then I'm bigger than him. I'm taller than him. Right. So it's like that's never been the way that heterosexual mating couples do it. The women are attracted to and will instinctually go towards a bigger man. Right. So how do they compensate with that? How do they make sure that they're not vulnerable in that relationship? And this is the key to the entire thing. Did I write it down? I feel like I already wrote it down. No, I didn't. The key differentiator between masculine and feminine, especially towards body composition. Fuck. Breaks down like this. Women, I can't even remember whether I've already gone over this. This is sometimes the problem when I do these is I don't remember always what I've done. I could do the gender signs, but I can't remember what they are. Women develop their bodies for efficiency. I would say efficiency and grace. If you could quantify what that is, grace is like it's maybe not a technical term, but I would say efficiency or grace. Right? Men under hyper masculine, hyper like combative and competitive environmental, which I think is increased by things like public school, because there's 30, there's like it's I'll go on a little tangent here just to explain this. If you think of a normal tribal breakdown of 150 people or a band, then you would have a multi-age group children status, probably with little groupings of similar aged people. And that is how we have biologically, like for the long run, been, even in a village, it's pretty similar, a small village. So it's not until you get to large settlements that you get to this system of public school manifests, where it's like you are interacting. And it's the weirdest thing. Like, think about you are thrown in a group of your own age that is far higher than people would have ever encountered. Then you are started at the bottom and run through a gauntlet of people older than you being dragged through that environment. Like, that's not at all how you would do that if you were wanting success. You would have like a highly controlled environment, and you would systematically expose them to older children in an environment that could be observed. You know what I mean? Or there'd be trusted older children that would act as mentors and things like that, and chaperones. And they would have already been tested. So it was more about about reliability more than conformity. Conformity is the like ugly stepsister of reliability. Like, if you can, because people can fake it. You can't fake real reliability, but you can fake conformity. And so like our public systems more than likely are breeding a sociopathic or psychopathic cohort of individuals who are very, very, very good at feigning cohesion, cooperation, like that. And then they basically police the disruptive fringes. And this is why it's like if you get a state that's operating under this type of control system, it's like, well, the state doesn't really need to do a lot. Every now and then, if the state just kind of says, we're on to like this, then the conformist enforcers will self-determine their thing to attack the disruptive fringe. And this is what's happening. But it's like it's all, there is no conformist solution to all of our problems. The main problem is that every single young person in this country's mind is being formed through a conformist structure that is completely the problem. A conformist structure is the problem. That's what's causing all of the problems. All of the disruption, all of the chaotic behavior, all of the it's a symptom, it's a reaction to a unsustainable conformist cult, and that's how every single one of those people will explain it, right? But then rather than meeting a committee or a council of people that listen and process the criticisms or the disruption, they're processed by the as I said, self-declared, hall monitors of conformity. Usually, the reason that they're being they're being instigated into this behavior is because they have developed a sociopathic ability to sociopathically operate in conformity. And I've met tons of individuals like this. Like, they break down. You can break their shell very easily, and they don't have anywhere to go. They have to dissociate, or they have to leave the conversation. They can't actually process that because they haven't developed a full functional understanding of society or of anything. They've just gotten very good at feigning cooperation or cohesion. So they're victims, and then they end up becoming abusers, and then they also become reinforcers of that system. And then it's like when the system changes, they're the ones that feel the largest pain point, and that's what they're doing, because, and it could be down to you could think of young developmental issues with their family or environment, retarded their ability to adapt social things, and then there's a big pain point towards that adaptation, and so they don't want to have to do it again. But this is the world, And basically, the way that I would describe it is, if you're a nomadic tribe in Australia, you're constantly in different environments. So that is what you do. And that's where I feel it's like the heavy lifting in this novelty factor is being done by entertainment, but then the entertainment's kind of breaking down because there are no solutions, right? And the entertainment is kind of constantly tapping us to warn us that this conformity is leading us to chaos. But the pain point for people to adapt, or to people to roll with the punches, so to say, in social movements is very large. And I'd say that's because of more than likely you'd assume that's because of a disrupted childhood development, or just completely unacceptable development in childhood. So it's felt as a far larger pain point, and so they will always go to find that cohesion. It's like, we're doing this, and a lot of that camaraderie actually comes from criticizing the disruptive people. These are the things like lazy, disruptive, fucking all of the weird, all of that shit. And that is traditionally the cohort that has been preyed upon by psychiatrists. But the conformist solution is running out. It's running out of runway. It's not going to take off. It can't. And it's like, that's the largest, and that's I'd say the differentiator. Yeah, the Catholics and the religious institutions, they've got blood all over their history, and I'd say they're not saints, but they're not perfect in this. But there is a type of the way that they managed conformity was that religion was the focal point. So you'd say, you do whatever you do all week, right? And then you come and look at the cross, take the thing, and then that just keeps you in that. But it's under God. It's actually it's incredibly clever. It's incredibly clever. So you can see that the state imitated this with a high intensive level. That's what the schooling system is. But then there is no correction. The only correction that you have with the state is negative, which is very weird. It's like taxes, fines and things by speeding fines and shit like that, and all the way up to prison, really. But there's no, and now it's like the state is in absolute opposition to the church, and now they've got no exit because they've positioned their psychiatric cult in opposition to organized religion. And I can't actually believe it's because I'm I wasn't born overly religious, and I don't fit the archetype of a normal person that's talking about these things, really. It's a massive curiosity for me, but it's 100%. I am absolutely amazed that there just isn't a front line between, especially I think in West Australia. Why doesn't every religion right now just oppose the state? That's what I can't get. You can't you can't. And then things like the LGBTQ, it's if you assume that the Vatican specifically, I think especially compared to Islam, is 80% responsible for the acceptable level of societal change towards the acceptability of homosexuals, which is wonderful. But there is a psychiatric group of imposters, and then a rampant kind of street festival that's never ending, that is declaring themselves as the thing. It's no, the heavy lifting was of course done by the largest, longest institution that kept us in order. So it's they, by one single ceremony every week, that was not in people's lives. It was not thing. It was just yes, come here. And then we slowly but surely just shifted society to where it should be. And then the state is trying to basically they're listening in on the walls and being oh yeah, we got to do this. Let's do it bigger and brighter and more exaggerated. And then we beat them, and it's that's that you're off that now. We're here, you've kept going, and now we're pretty much just solid. And I really do. It's so funny because the concept of of being against specifically Catholics, but Christianity, this is the most nefarious part of my mother's treatment and things like that. It's that was perceived as the problem. So, and that's what's so weird for me is it's not directly, my mother wasn't anti-religious, but it's just the society was quite anti-Christian. And particularly to do with, so if you have a parent who has gone through a diagnosis through a psychiatric intervention, whether voluntary or involuntary, you will inevitably fall under this same position, which is completely unacceptable and basically mirrors absolute racism or discrimination in any other arena. And I would say is more difficult because it's the ultimate showdown. You will be led towards that psychiatric intervention. You will be. And this is the most nefarious part of it is they say that it's hereditary. It's no, it's not hereditary. The minute you call it hereditary, you shift the entire fucking experiment to basically guarantee that it's hereditary. That's the problem. It's like, I suppose you could say religion was hereditary, but no one did. It's just that's the way it worked. If your dad was a Christian, you were a Christian, except for the mass exodus, 50, 60 years ago. And it's like, where was the exodus directed to? The psychiatric cult, and the state-based mechanism. So it's just a repeating cycle over and over and over again. I think there must have been high-level interactions, and this is where, like, maybe my criticisms towards specifically Catholics was actually okay, because I think there was a little bit of like, we have to work with them, and I think that's what amplified this and kept it going for so long. And that's to do with, like, I think you have to clearly identify that all the churches were under attack and it's like, if you understand that, say the major conflict between Islamic and Christian, the Islamics are going to favor, even Judaism and Christian as well, those two, they're going to favor atheism against, they're going to use whatever they can. You know what I mean? And it's like, we are not, so when we encounter problems with the Islamic community, they're basically utilizing atheism to attack Christendom. And this is where the psychiatrists need to be declared. It's like they need to be absolutely declared that you have a absolutely unacceptable bias towards the Islamic faith. It's just structurally, because when you are practicing, I'd say when you are abusing people within the bounds of a traditionally Christian society, because you are being utilized as atheistic fucking basically militia onto Christianity. And this is because it breaks down all the time. It's like, obviously not, it takes a lot of discipline and a lot of, like, care and a lot of study. And I'm in a very kind of privileged position, I suppose, in one way to say that, where I've been able to do that. But I've also made myself do that because I knew how important it was. Because it's not just for my behalf, it's for everyone else. You get a couple of levels in more complicated or more disturbing conditions. There's no way you could do this. You don't have the predisposition to speak and do all these things. You can't do it. This is what my mother could never do this. Or she could, but it's like, I have a lot of things at hand that allow me to be able to do this. So you've got to understand that this is just an unacceptable format to be continuing this on. It doesn't. It's just completely the end of the line, and I think especially right now there is an absolute conflict of interest in all Christian countries. If you are a Islamic psychiatrist, or if you are, say, like Persian, where you have been dispossessed or still perhaps in the sphere of that, you are absolutely not allowed to practice on any single individual that is not of Islamic faith. How on earth could you ever do that? And these are just basically, this is where it's going to constantly be. And I think there is a Nazi aspect of it, because the Nazis are basically, they're like Christian adjacent, but they're more scientism and more atheism. It's like they're like, where is atheism? Okay, we're just there if it's Christian. That's where the Nazis seem to sit. They understand. They don't want to distance themselves from Christianity. So they're like, where is atheism? Where is here? Look, we are in the room of Christians, yeah? And that's kind of even the archetype of, if you think of like Vikings, right? If you think of Vikings just being like that. And that's basically, the Normans are kind of that archetype in our English history. And that actually is my archetype. But that I'm not a Nazi. So basically, I'm on a battlefield of Norman descendants, I'm guessing, and half of them are going towards Nazism and half of them are going towards Christianity, because Nazism is kind of the modern day version of Norse pagan fucking whatever. So it's like, hey, you're gonna get caught. You know, it's like Vikings are cool until they're caught by a really sophisticated thing, and all of your axes and shit don't look cool and fucking hip and thing. They look like criminals, and you know, you get shot like fucking pigs from a fucking helicopter. And that's kind of where we're at. It's like we don't tolerate barbarism here, and it's like this is barbarism. Absolutely. So it's like you've got to now understand. It's like basically if you're a Nazi and you want to support a psychiatric community, you'd better fucking convert to Islam, and you'd better start fucking wearing a fucking all of the shit, because we need to be able to identify you. There cannot be an acceptable white Christian-based psychiatry, you know, where Islamic people or atheists are expected to be able to be state-supported to discriminate against Christians. That's fucking insane. And it's like, if you think that Christians are pussies, well, let's just give it a minute or two. Let's fucking rev that fucking Christian war machine up again. You know, because we're doing it in defense of thousands of years of beautiful Christian history. We're not, you know, we don't need to rage ourselves into a frenzy. We just kill you. You know, we just basically just cut. No. Just like that. You know, I'd have no, if I was in charge of a military right now, I'd go and kill every psychiatrist in Western Australia. I'm not saying I'm a perfect person. I'm saying that's what I'd do. Right? And then the flip can't be, it's like, oh, what? Are the psychiatrists going to say that they're going to kill every, every priest? I'm not a priest, but I'm defending priests. I don't know. You know, if this was a trial, it's like, how is this going to have to go? It's like, well, basically, I'm defending every Anglican and Christian priest on fucking earth against a psychiatric community. You know, I don't need to fill the aesthetic of a priest, do I? But I can work on their behalf, and I can say that would be my military solution. Maybe there's a solution that isn't military. That's why I'm keeping talking. But that would be, it's like, all right, I think we should basically round up every psychiatrist in Western Australia and line them up against a wall and blow the back of their fucking head off. And go, this is a dangerous fucking scientific atheistic cult. Look at it. Look at the evidence. Look how long it takes. 10 fucking years to explain this concept, when that person might diagnose 4 or 5 people a day. Asymmetric fucking, you know, assault on this society. With the Premier there. It's like the Premier, dead. Why? I just told you why. 10 years to explain a concept, asymmetric attack, absolutely unacceptable onslaught against Christian people in this country, in this state. What do you mean? That's judge, jury, and executioner. That's it. What the hell are you talking about? It's like the Nazis are always like, oh, we didn't know what's going on. It's like, there's no way you can't know what's going on. Your dad was a literal child psychiatrist. You're building a fucking electrical infrastructure. It's like, that's the end of the fucking road. This is connected to a global web of things. It's like this isn't, we're not having territorial disputes on the map. We're having a global, you know, theocratic like council on these matters. You know, I don't have authority to say, yes, on my command, do it. But I will commit that to the evidence pile and say, that's what I do. You know, why? Well, because that's how mistreated I feel I've been. That's how complicated and disgusting. That's how much barbed wire and trenches I've had to fucking crawl through to get this constantly through to everyone in a society that's just obsessed with distraction. So even that, it's like, it's a war. And I'll say this at the time as well. It's like a battleground is just, it's noise and chaos and violence and things like that. I'm on a battleground. I'm always on a battleground. It's constant, like, obstacles just everywhere. And that's how they keep doing it. They're just like, Ryan Gosling in space talking to a rock. You'll never catch us. You'll never catch us. It's like, what? It's like, there's got to be a moment where it's like where I'm allowed to envisage and display my crawling through your trenches, through your barbed wire on my country's soil for no reason. Why? Why is that all there? And then just the asymmetric, it's like, if you just say a psychiatrist can diagnose one person a day, that's 5 a week. You start adding those numbers up over 10 years, and it's not that. And then you start adding up, it's like, what are they remunerated? What was I remunerated? Negative. Negative, negative, negative. To do what? To protect Christianity? This is a fucking insane. And it's like, even the thing, it's like, the most dangerous thing, say there is a bias towards, because it's structural bias towards the Islamic community, because especially on Christian soil. So it's like a loophole. And they're like strange bedfellows continuously, the atheists and the Islamics, right? But it's like, the reason I'm not going purely after the Islamics is because it's not just that. And then also it's like, hey, see all those angry people? I could just as easily be stuck in a fucking psychiatrist uniform, and we could just do the same onto the Islamics. There's no doubt in my mind that Islam is a fucking suicide death cult. Imagine what they did to all the Christians. It's like, via this tool, it's like, what do you think they do to Islamic people? But I don't want to do that. I think it's unacceptable. It's not caused by Islam. It's Islam, like, uses it to their advantage a little bit, but it's caused by bureaucracy and administration, like, just protocol stretched through a technological period, and then through you've got to understand, it's like, think of the concept of Hail Mary. If I was to conceive of this 150 years ago and say, I want to get to this exact situation right now, no one ever did that. Of course they didn't, right? It's reliant on so many variable things, like that would be a Hail Mary. So say this was what I wanted to get to, that would be the equivalent of it's like a fucking double backflip, fucking trampoline jam, or it's like a hole in one on a par 4. There's no way. But it doesn't change. It's like, where do you look at it? So you go, say we could conceive of a totalitarian lunatic wanting this exact scenario. Then you would have to, that's called a Hail Mary. Because it's changed so many things so much and led it to this, like, just absolutely nightmare situation. That is not the way it goes. It's that conformity and administration is a very important tool, but if it doesn't include feedback loops into its system, and instead it relies on policing, like disruptive elements, right? It considers all disruptive elements the same as a weed, or as a what's the word? You could say like a inclusion. In glass, if you get inclusions when you're making glass, it weakens the glass. It's an unacceptable mineral that's in with the other fluid or the other things that creates a deformity, a defect, right? And that's what it is. Like, these psychiatrists are finding defects, but it's like we as people and as all biology, we're chaotically stable. We have chaotic stability. So those defects are really important. This is what it's like. If you want a character in someone's face, is defects. Like, structural integrity is defects. Like, if you think, like, I think it's even I can't think of an exact example. There are engineering examples, countless examples where you put a defect in it to make it stronger. You know, you could think of this like rebar in concrete. That's a way that you engineer a structurally sound solution, but it needs to incorporate lots of different things, right? But if all of it's like, oh, you dropped a fucking nail in my concrete, and then you shoot that person, it's like, then, you know, or stop sitting watching me pour concrete, you fucking weirdo, bang, I'll shoot you. That's not acceptable. That person, you know, how many of those people had to die before someone said, why don't you stick some steel in it? Yeah, this is the thing. And it's like, we used to have far better systems that knew how to deal with, that understood disruptive people are constructive people, you know, in the long run. And I think the highest level of that's probably Japan. Like, Japan is the clearest example globally of that mentality. They call it whatever they call it, that constant progression. But they do that as a culture. And they do it individually as a culture, and then in corporate culture and in company cultures. So they understand that perfectly. Right? That's what we are not doing. You know, and then and weirdly, even if we were doing that, the psychiatrist would just be like, oh, well, we were the necessary disruption to get him to do all of this good work. And they'll pat themselves on the back, and I'll just feel like, fuck you people. And then they'll just call me one of them. They'll be like, Shannon, you are a psychiatrist, obviously. I'd be like, fuck you fucking people. It's the most fucking culty, self-serving bullshit mentality is to do that. But I guess they're right. It is just progression. Right. So the last thing I was saying is women develop efficiency and grace, and men develop speed and power, because men are put in hostile, competitive environments usually, even not in school, like not in even just in normal schooling, but even in ancient, you would always be interacting with men and older boys in order to, like, so that's how you build men, right? The problem is that those men are becoming less and less utilizable in a world that's changing. So that's got to inevitably change. But basically what I'm saying is that women are not under as much time or power scrutiny. You know, women traditionally don't wrestle with each other, and they don't race each other up the hill, and they don't do all that behavior. So their development of their body is slow and steady and graceful and efficient, whereas men are rushed into it. Right. And if you understand a historical environment of war, and that men would basically live to this age, right? That's what makes sense. It's like, oh, I lived to 40. Yeah, because I'd be dead. And I've been in a war for the last 10 years, an intense war. That weirdly, so the most intense war, filled with obstacles, filled with emotional, all the same things, but I can't manifest violence because that would prove them right. That's how you get this. That's the tightrope I was strung in front of me. I was like, oh, you fuckers. I've got to walk on that tightrope. And that's why the large things, when I'm declared of being violent by talking, it's like, what the fuck are you on about? You know, you can't, like, it's anyway. So, and I developed, as a man, speed and power. And I can see in my own defenses against this, especially when intensely pushed back against, I can see my own adaptation to start disfavoring speed and power. See, speed and power is like, I run to my fucking children's stepdad's house and I cut his head off on the fucking street and I get on the news. That's speed and power. It's really simple. You know, it's really simple. So, and then you could even think, okay, so is civilization, is intelligence actually the male coping mechanism with this equation? So if speed and power are taken off, what do we do with all of that energy, all of that testosterone? Where does it go? It goes to intelligence. It goes to tactics, tacticianry. The Art of War and all of these things. Okay, so I'm in that, and I am in a war, but it's like I don't want to fight a war. I don't want to stay in that archetype. I was attacked, and I was attacked in a very specific way. It's like this battle is like there's a moment where I have no access and no outlet for speed and power. And people would be like, go and kick a boxing bag or go and do jiu-jitsu. It's like, no, I can't do jiu-jitsu because I'm fighting a war, right? You don't, and that's, anyone would be like, yeah, I don't want to do jiu-jitsu with someone who's fighting a war. For me, it's like, it's not, I don't get focused and grounded from doing a imitation of war when I'm in a war. It's like and the intellectual war or the thing war, it's like there's no difference. It's like it is war. So all of it is restraint. I'm concerned, but there's a step off point. It's like I'm not fighting a never-ending psychological war against the global population of psychiatrists, because the theology that I'm, or the religions that I'm representing, it's not intelligence. That's not what it is. And we're already beating you. We're not beating you. We're just exposing you as absolute disgusting fucking people. And it's like, you're coming under this same effect. You're already in an industry that restricts speed and power. You're already operating faster than I am and using more powerful interventions than I am. So you're maintaining your masculinity in your kind of presentation by still issuing those things. And I guess I am as well. It's like that's the rampancy and the aggressiveness and the dedication to do this every day. That's my speed and power mechanism. But it's like at the same time, my body, all of the development is going back and developing the efficiency and grace that I didn't naturally adapt through because I was raised as a boy. So it's like the body equation, right? When so many people are using that, they think of like boys have a penis and girls have a vagina. It's not that. I'm talking about like the way women move, the way that everything is that is developed slowly, with efficiency and grace, just with no competitiveness, not really anything, just on your own things, and then with absolute support. Down to every level, you are supported to slowly and efficiently grow. And that is what creates this entire fucking situation. It has nothing to do with fucking gender. Nothing at all. It is to do with the amount of pressure that is placed on the individual's body. And it's like you push someone for speed and power, you get speed and power, right? Which might win a race, it might win a sprint or win a boxing match or win a UFC match or any of these things. But then you're going to constantly, like that's why people are trying to, I think particularly with testosterone, that's male culture. Competitiveness traditionally is male culture. Women have entered it quite recently and quite aggressively, which is, and we don't have enough time to wait the 1,000 years for women for us to see the decline. It's like, women who are pushed early for speed and power develop a kind of antisocial disassociation disorder when they're older because they are discarded, and female culture is not used to that. Male culture is incredibly like that. Men are discarded as soon as 40 discarded, or disabled discarded, ugly discarded. That's overall society, and this translates through our livestock system as well. Go and have a look at it. Discarded, 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 discarded. So that's like and I love it when you get a woman who's representing these things. It's like, it's the strangest fucking thing when the overall thing can be explained like this. And this is how, like, if you take the psychiatrics out of it, there isn't a problem. If it becomes a matter of time and pressure, and there's two ways to look at that, like time and pressure. That's what's always used to make diamonds, right? Time and pressure and time. That was ice cold tea, just for everyone out there that that would make them shudder, I think. So pressure and time makes diamonds. Long time, strong, pressure. So in that saying is, stretch it out over a long time with strong, nice pressure. And that's the exact opposite to what is issued onto men. And I don't actually know. It's like we've been doing this to men for so long. Because we need to, I think, because we do have enemies. The problem is that our technologies are providing these other, and this is a technology, catapult. We're not new to this, but this is an extremely pivotal point. The longevity of biological men will be the longevity, the peace of mind, well-being, societal integration, education levels, almost every other thing will be improved by a reduction of the introduction of speed and power competitiveness in young men or young boys, if they are allowed to develop efficiency and grace. That will, if falsely utilized, that will present more feminine. But the equation, that's simply because women are being allowed to develop slowly and efficiently and with support, and men are not. Right? And you don't have to, I'm not talking about sex. The only way that this breaks down with sex, and this is continuously what's so funny, it's like, if you take out the violent aspect of the necessity for male hyper-masculine aggression or masculinity or power and strength, if you take out competitive sports and things like that, then the highest demand for that archetype of human being is heterosexual women. So women's, and this is what's even funnier, it's like if we look at the recent last century of female presentation, and we can see that it's hypersexual, right? That's to appease men, but I don't think it is. I think it's to appease women. I think it's to compete with women. So that's that speed and power equation done onto women, but they only have sexuality to draw on. But they're competing. So you just couldn't compete with women. Women would compete on how discretionary they were, on how so when women start competing on hypersexual things, that's already masculine, hypermasculine. That's also stimulating the hypermasculine, and then they're competing for men by creating a hypermasculine competition that is almost completely useless in 2026 modern day warfare. And so it's like that's it. But we're talking about mass, millions, billions of people being organized in that fashion. And it leads to, that's what leads to chaotic world wars. If you keep insisting that men, to appease women's desires, are developed for speed and power, not longevity, and not for well-being either. Yeah, the only way that men deal with it is they convert their discipline and dedication and courage into, and they reinforce that with cultural tools. Like, that's what the entire masculine manosphere culture is. It's like, yeah, stoic philosophy. It's like, get in and do it. And it's like, that's important because we are faced with challenges. It's just that my challenges don't require any of that speed and power. They don't require it. That's part of my stoicism, is to identify that and to attempt to appropriately develop the efficiency and grace that I wasn't able to do. And it's like any type of social disorders or social, things, antisocial manifestations are all caused by the fact that I grew up in an obsessed masculine culture that only supported speed and power. So it's and then you're criticized for trying to fix it while in battle, which doesn't even reflect my people's history. My traditional generals and leaders in British military history, they're incredibly feminine if you looked at them today. They're well aesthetically concerned, very slender, very, very whatever. I'd say they fill the position of a well-adapted, person, despite the fact that they were cutting people's heads off and shooting cannons at each other and stuff like that. But it's like, that's where we are. And this is the problem. It's like when we hyper-elevate, say, the UFC, and it's like, I don't have a problem with UFC except for how it's being culturally utilized to do this thing. And it's just a very complicated scenario. And the weirdest thing as well is that a lot of UFC fighters, it's like, basically, if you go to this, say the 1980s, and you look at the Karate Kid, the aesthetic of martial arts was efficiency and grace. The advice from Mr. Miyagi is efficiency and grace. That's the whole thing. He's like, no speed and power, efficiency and grace. Wax on, wax off. That's the entire thing of it. The generation of people that were brought towards martial arts via that influence, or those influences around that time, then converted it into a speed and power competition. And that's what we have now. That's what UFC is. And so if children are being trained to participate in UFC, it's about speed and power. And it's about presenting the most hyper-masculine concept that can only be created via constant pressure on speed and power and competition. Speed plus power plus competition. Creates hyper-masculine. Efficiency, grace, and patience creates well-adapted, and then the problem is, it's like, these don't need to be associated with gender. Because, and then we get to the thing, it's like we have so many mixed messages. We have a premier in this state supporting, I think, bare knuckle boxing and a UFC competition, but he's the son of a child psychiatrist who majority of the problems that are being treated psychiatrically are hyperaggression and antisocial behavior, which is caused by over concentration and development on speed, power, and competition on young men. And also you could argue like the non-suitable father figures and stuff like that. I don't think that's necessarily, you can't extract. I think children have been being raised without father figures for a lot. I think men were at war, and I think men were doing other things. And so basically, I think there was a division. I think there was a overall concentration on a more feminine efficiency, grace, patience by either elder men and women onto children, and then every now and then the kind of hypermasculine men would come and grab the children, the boys, and say, right, have a fight. But they would be selecting. They'd be like, no, not him. Not him. Right? Women didn't select. I believe in more stable civilizations than this, I don't think women had any participation in on selection of that type of thing, especially on committee. I think it was understood that women and elderly men and selected men built a system of education and preparation for every child that held those things as key: efficiency, grace, patience, well adapted. And then I think the men who were warriors, they came in and they would select the children that were to be, prepared for the power and the speed. But they understood that it wasn't, so sometimes they might go into an intensive thing. There might be particularly a warrior class that was particularly prepared for those things and at the detriment of their own lives. And that was the commitment they made to their society, which is weirdly what I've done. It's just that it's in an intellectual and societal pursuit. That's what it is. But it's like I'm a warrior towards that. That's why it's like I am a fucking Christian monk warrior. That's what I am. I'm defending Christendom from an invading force of people that are basically doing the opposite. It's like you're not allowing any of these changes to make place. Like you've got nowhere to stand. You don't have any analysis of these effects. It's all just a book of ghosts. It's quite literally pagan fucking witchcraft at this stage. And your society is in absolute disarray, and you cannot separate your society from your psychiatric treatment. Of course, it's what it is. And I can't believe that an experiment like this is being allowed in this place, surrounded by how every religious organization is here. Why is this experiment being allowed to continue? It doesn't make any sense. Why are we being forced to daily heighten this psychiatric argument with itself? I'm not a member of the psychiatric cult. I haven't taken communion by the psychiatric cult. I don't carry the little rattle of the psychiatric cult. So this is unacceptable. Every single level of it. It's like how much more explanation do you need? You want to civilize your society. You need to lower the amount of influence, particularly on young men, about speed, power, and competition. You need to be very selective when they do it. And the funny thing is, it's like, because when time is included, so patience is being falsely determined as a female thing, but it's like, no, it's that women basically are able to manifest the traditional system of development. Men are being hyper curated towards disposable, hyper aggressive fucking lunatics constantly, but that's being done by women because women are presenting themselves as the good ones, basically. And that's where you get like Abby Chatfield. It's like, Abby, you need to do a bit more homework. It's like, you've done one good level. Oh, the speed, power, competitive, hyper-masculine manosphere. Yeah. Where is the thing for that coming from? Women. Why? Because women are scared. Why? Because there's too many hyper-aggressive masculine men. So what do? They create more of them to protect them. When all you've got is, and what is it, a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's all women have got if they're pussies. That's it. They're like, I'm scared. Ugh, I'll sit on this dick. Am I safer now? Am I safe now that I'm on this dick? Yeah, I feel safe. And then it's like, oh no, this guy's really scary. Oh no, I'll run away and hop on another dick. That's literally what we're doing. A bunch of fucking terrified female monkeys who are trying to keep up with an artificially hyper-stimulated speed, power, and competitive male environment are then basically perpetually fucking terrified, jumping from branch to branch and sitting on every fucking dick only to fucking jump off of that dick and fucking run away. And then also then being afraid of men that are trying to bring the thing back, which will inherently look feminine. It's like these things are so precariously positioned. And it seems so funny to me that, like, in a world where, like, every single person has high definition porn in their pockets, like, these are problems that we can't talk about, right? And it's like it's being just misconstrued on every level. And the thing is like, what I'm so if you take the gender thing out of it, and I say, as a warrior who's been fighting a war for 10 years for my family's freedom from a psychiatric fucking false imprisonment, from an absolutely unacceptable discrimination campaign and a dystopian cult-like fucking torture model of abuse. At age 39, I am finding in that battle that if I imitate the feminine and try and adapt my body, mainly my mind is like, there is an aspect of my mind, but I can't do my mind because I'm doing this. My mind cannot be feminine. My mind is the manifestation of all that speed, power, and competition that I was forced to participate in, which is lucky because it's making me able to defend myself against, like, overwhelming opposition on a one-sided trajectory, which is it's like insane. So my mind needs to stay there, but I do have there's a position. It's like there needs to be a declaration that this was bad. Then my mind can then go, you have successfully completed your mission as a man. You are now able to, because you're getting old. There's no point. It's like, yeah, my mind will never go away, but I'm allowed to step off the fucking battlefield in that moment. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, that's where my body, I can already start to begin with it, but then I'm being declared as a fucking trans. But what the fuck does that mean? Shut the fuck up. Women do not have a fucking monopoly on an efficiently developed and graceful patient fucking body. They do not. It is an adaptive mechanism that you have been allowed to adapt because efficiency in the long run will beat out power and speed. Because you have never been expected to combat with men. You're not thrown in a ring with men. You just have to sit on their dick and it's pacified. You're celebrated and actually selected via how efficient and because grace is basically efficiency, right? So, and beauty is like non-stress, is that all those things, all the feminine. You are selected because it's a whole lot of things that you're being selected for. It's like you look like you're in a non-stressed, you are able to develop efficiently, you move with grace, you have patience and care and femininity. That's that. That's a pandered to, that's a lapdog. Literally. That's how women have been developing in relation to our civilization. That's where they are. They're a lapdog. But not in the derogatory sense. Just like that, it's a similar trajectory. Whereas a man is developed to be a fucking Rottweiler. Now there is an in-between. There is a golden retriever, which is in between. It's not, but compositionally, it's not far away from its traditional wolf-like thing, but temperamentally and behaviorally, it's completely different. So it's like, that's the thing. And that comes from breeding and environmental thing. right? With dogs, we can't talk to them, so we can only breed. You have to cull out the fucking things. But the psychiatrists don't do that. They are managing what is an unspoken, unseen battle between, you know, these two concepts: efficiency and power and speed, right? And I do think a lot of these fucking gender people who started, like, you know, it was a long time ago, and they're doing it in the Freudian era, in the youth movement, sex, drugs, and rock and roll period, and it's like, without the concept that they're under 24-hour surveillance. It's like, of course, some of them were fucking weird, right? It's like you need to go, all right, both sides of that argument were weird. We're here in 2026 now, right? I don't need to fucking talk about anything sexual to describe what I see is going on. You know, it's like this is just these things. And it doesn't even need to be smaller. And what's even weirder is, like, because I'm having to go back and readapt the efficiency and grace, you know, in different things, and I'm about 15 kilos overweight now because I'm in this stressful environment and conflicted with this. What I'm finding is, it's like, that's the hardest physical work I could ever do. I can go and lift, like, even like I'm not, but I don't have a lot of fat. Like, I'm a strong, large person. If I don't lift any weights, if I go and lift weights, I'd be huge. I don't want to do that. That's not that. I have no doubt in my mind that can be developed. But to develop the efficiency and the grace and the movements and things like that, what would the best word would be? Refinement, right? Which is like, if you think of playing piano or playing guitar, which I've already done. So I've already done all of this with my hands to play guitar. I didn't play guitar as a child. I picked it up when I was about 27. So I've already done it. But doing that with major motor functions in an environment of absolute hostility, where you will be forced to move in a feminine way under scrutiny of that, is insane. While on a battlefield, battling psychiatrists that 50 years ago were interpreting this as fucking mental illness, as autogynephilia, and were literally fucking mutilating fucking people and drugging them and sticking them in dungeons. Because they had a monopoly on the refined, cultured masculinity archetype. But it was through the administrative, professional presentation. I wear a tie and you're wearing a dress. That's fucking crazy, right? But now we have women walking around in glad wrap all over the place with their vaginas fucking talking as they stroll down the fucking laneway. The entire environment has changed. You know, the professional presentation is iffy now. It's like, hang on, we're surrounded by these professional corporate-esque suit-wearing fucking lunatics, and they're all fucking nightmares. But still we're being forced to have this same argument about this same thing. And it's like, we just need to get to terms with it. It's like, people have been experimenting on other people under the blanket of the state. That's what's happening. Not just recently, not just with trans things, constantly, as an actual fucking device of the state in every single Western civilization to protect the conformity of the bureaucracy that was seen as the sacred temple of our society. But now I'd say we're at a disposition, we're at a proportion now where it's like, it's at least 50% of the terrible things happening in the world are literally caused by the state apparatus and its failure to adapt. And it is policing its own evolution. It is preventing. It always has been. That's basically, it's like imagine an autistic person building a train or building a fucking, I don't know, some type of elaborate thing on a table, right? And they're just like, and then they get bothered by a child. That's the state and the disruptive person. The autistic person building the thing on the table has outsourced abuse, psychological, physical torture to a class of people called psychiatrists. That's the best way to explain it. That there is no way that is going to survive this technological revolution. There is no way. You need to march into a place. You need to be gathered up and you need to be deprogrammed from this fucking bullshit. There is no fucking way. Otherwise, it's like I will represent every single man, woman, and child being falling under that psychiatric care system for free. There will be a backlog. I want a court case on every single external attempt to section any single person. And they have to go to court and go through this. And that will take fucking years to do the backlog. It's like, how else are you going to do it? Unless every psychiatrist is expected to combat legal, because that's what it is. It is a fucking loophole to dehumanize people, to dispossess them. It is akin to the worst crimes of Nazi Germany. You are instantly like that. There we go. That's done. Person's freedom is gone. They're stuck in a fucking washing machine of bullshit, and they are never given legal representation, not once. They are the judge, jury, and executioner of an unacceptable fucking loophole, band-aid solution of a autistic fucking hyper fucking fixated delusional bureaucracy and administration class that are being replaced. This is the moment to just fucking march in. We don't need to fucking stop. You are all fucking lunatics. You've been bred by lunatics. You're fucking keeping a fucking tower of fucking cards fucking up and making sure the wind doesn't blow on it by torturing people and creating lifelong family declarations of family illness and things like that. You are absolutely unacceptably fucked in this thing. There is no way fucking forward. The last days, the types of child abuse and child mutilation and things like that, that's just, I guess, the high watermark of dystopian thing, because it's children and it's sexual and it's surgery and it's permanent and it's all these things. But it's like, that is just the public fucking facing thing of what has been going on in a far more disgusting, long stretching way for over 100 years. It should be, it's like there are, it's so funny to do it like class-based. It'd have to be like garbage men. It's like psychiatrists are lower than garbage men, but that's gross because there's nothing wrong with garbage men. A garbage man it's driving a truck nowadays, and it's kind of a pretty good job, and it's really, so it's like that's nowhere near. It's like garbage men are fucking basically saints compared to psychiatrists in this modern day. And that's not a really good way to do it. It's like, basically, if you are a psychiatrist, if you are age 40 and under, right, you are more than likely just like, you're a victim of I don't even know, preparation. It's like, that's where it's like, but you need to understand that that's all anyone ever is. So the Nazis were there, and that's where I say, it's like, I would line you up and shoot you against a wall. So this is the argument we're having. You can no longer maintain an argument with this amount of dedication by saying, well, obviously he's crazy because he wants to kill us. No, it's like, no, maybe you're crazy. Maybe you're fucking Nazis. And what I continue seeing, any interaction by anyone conforming to this by this creation that just keeps growing, like, you're all in that. And it is the strangest thing to witness on every occasion that I witness it. But it's like, that's the argument we're having. Right? You're war criminals, right? Collectivizing. Your only salvation is to remain collectivized. That's also what's exposing you as the war criminals, as a military force. When I say the iPhone is now declared as a Nazi fucking, article of Nazi uniform. That's right. So it's like, what do we do? Well, any psychiatrist with an iPhone, you're SS Nazis, and we're going to fucking kill you on the spot. This is it. You don't have anywhere to fucking hide. You don't have anywhere to go. There is basically 200 years of the future just sitting on your fucking desk. You know what I mean? There is no pathway forward in any of this. Every single court case in this state, because this is happening here, should be scrutinized through this. So it means every sectioning, every like coerced diagnosis, every single thing, that's going to be scrutinized. Every single thing of it. Basically, any person that's sitting in a cell right now or in a hospital that's saying, I shouldn't be here, right? I want a list of those names. I want a list of their family. I want a list of what their family is doing, who they're working for, all of these things. That's it. You're working for one fucking thing. You're building a fucking space cult on Aboriginal land with the entire world watching. It's absolutely the fucking end of days as far as this profession is concerned. It will radically affect every single administration. It's been a slow and steady increase. I would say that the reason the Nazis were so identifiable is because they did this with speed, power, and competition. The competition was the war. This structural Nazism, and this is why it's not German, this is Nazism, has been developed with efficiency, grace, and patience. So we've seen the masculine Nazism was Nazis, Nazi Germany, Hitler. Nazi feminism is this. It's dancing like psychiatrists, like, oh yes, chop another one of their testicles off. Chop one of and it's just elite. It is a elitely pandered to. Like it is. It's actually. It's counterintuitively. It's like it's manifestations of men that have been allowed to have a stable, balanced perspective between efficiency, grace, patience, well adapted, and speed, power, and capitalism. And competition, which is capitalism, right? Because they've been in, well-off, structurally sound families that haven't been being discriminated against by their own kind. They develop through. They do not appreciate the environmental impact of their patients, which they should never be fucking called, of their victims. And so they are basically building narcissistic fucking cults of patients. And then they are wheelbarrow loaded, these people, by the state. Which continue, and then they're remunerated by the state, which continues their elevation to these, to these Pharisees of 2026, of modern day society. And you'd think it's like if these people are able to elicit so much power, it's like why aren't they not here? Why is the only interaction I have here is with occasionally with random fucking trolls with pretend names? Do you know what I mean? What are you trying to do? That's your model. That's your opposition, is that. It's like, anybody that disagrees with us, we stick them in an isolation chamber and then we torture them with trolls until they snap. Until they inevitably snap and expose them. That's the witch trials. That's what that is. It's like it's so clear when you see basically that this only works, the profession of psychiatry works when it is domineering over the top of women. So all the feminists should be up in arms about it because that's the majority of it. Yeah. Domineering over the top of women and their children, sexual fucking thing, all of this shit. That's where it works. And then also the hyper-aggressive masculine. When they meet someone on equal terms, they can't do shit. They can't do a fucking thing. You know, you'd think that their concept is to prepare people to meet them on equal terms, but they can't because they're leading a cult. So if you're in opposition, they will just continuously push, and this is what it's showing. So it's not a science, it's a filtering mechanism of constant aggression, sociopathic aggression, to basically push someone. It's like, and I always do it in a German accent because I think it's better. It's like, hey, where are you going to go? I'm going to keep pushing you. Are you going to become aggressive, or are you going to become feminine and submissive? Which are you going to do? Because there is no way that you're not agreeing with me. I have the entire state apparatus behind me. I have the entire pharmaceutical industry behind me. You are going to submit on one of these levels. And that's why that you want to explain the what is it? Non-binary. It's like, yeah, that's the only way to combat that is non-binary. You have to do it. So it's a symbiotic relationship. It's like, well, I'm masculine, I'm feminine, I'm masculine, I'm feminine. I have to balance because I'm being pushed off a cliff by fucking clipboard wielding fucking Nazi fucking psychiatrists. That's what explains it. But in reality, I'm just a lost English boy that grew up in the bush of Australia, like a little Mowgli. You know, but Mowgli didn't have to deal with psychiatrists. It's all of the things. And it's like, it's just the entitled, like, holding pen for a bunch of Nazi children. You know, and what's even weirder is because of how unacceptable Nazism was, the aggressive version, the masculine version of Nazism, they adapted this exact protocol to be over here. And all that you really, and this is the weirdest thing as well, to close it all off, as I said, if this is restricted, if speed, power, and competition isn't working and it becomes intellectualized, what is the metric that we use to distribute that intellectualization? If you morally and ethically develop that intellectualization, you know, you're heading towards, I guess, religiously, it would be called sainthood, right? Now, if you immorally and unethically develop that intellectualization, that's called psychopathy or sociopathy. That's what they've developed. So it's basic. There is a dual evolution. It's like you have the entire collective history, and it's also prevalent within the church. It's like basically this is what happened. And I'd say that one of the reasons of that is because, so say, what are the desires of men? What are they hoping to result? What are they hoping to achieve by this adaptation to hyper-developed intellectualization of, rather than speed and power, would be for higher mate selection. But then hypersexuality and pansexualism, all these things, is not socially acceptable. So you have to land somewhere else. And this is where I think it's like when they claim the urge to power, it's like, well, the urge to power is intimately tied towards sexual selection. And so that's where you introduce the metric of like celibacy towards the priesthood. The celibacy seems to act as a filter towards the antisocial development of hypersexualization to do with the urge to power. So it's a different type of power. Your power becomes your association to God as opposed to the amount of women that you have. And then they're mixed anyway, because if you have a congregation of people, you're in a powerful position over people. So it's all the same thing. I'm not against all of that all of those things towards that urge of power thing. But basically, you can't. The only acceptable way to manifest hypersexuality is to disguise it in a professional, social career. And that's what they're doing. They're in a powerful position over a lot of women. It doesn't have. It's like it becomes stretched out and turned into a kink. And that's where it's like that's where all of the terrible things will come. But the dynamics are all being changed by women kind of jumping the fence and developing speed, power, and competition through a hypersexual lens. And then there's now a saturation of hypersexuality, but men are still, in general, not permitted to openly express hypersexuality unless they're homosexual, which is again fucking weird. It's like women are kind of hyper selecting. I think women's job seems to be to create a hyper developed ultimate masculine cohort that's very small. That seems to be continuously what they're doing. By hypersexualizing, they actually end up diluting their options. By pushing men as their only output for hypersexuality to be homosexuality, they're lowering it again. And so it's like they're trying to achieve this ultimate cohort of hypersexual but tolerant, non-participatory and non-homosexual men. And that would be traditionally, I think that's like they're the cardinals kind of thing. But it's really, how else could you describe that? Because no one's curating. I'd say there's a really high percentage of hypersexual young masculine psychiatrists out there. So that's a definite. The idea of 20-year-olds going around with men in their 20s going around with psychiatry degrees in the same kind of mechanism I was in with this hypersexual environment. I can't imagine. But there's no scrutiny because they're inherently against religion, and the alternative is celibacy, which is now like completely like it's so abstract to this current society. And even myself, I can't even conceive it. I'm like, I don't know. I don't understand that. I'm at the door of it because I'm basically so disgusted by modern day women's behavior and so fed up with their kind of thing. But it's like, still, I'm not. So it's just very strange. It seems to be like, but never declared. We understood. We lived in Christendom. We lived in places surrounded by. We need to understand that this administration, specifically with the highest level, the clergy of the psychiatrists, is just. This is where we live. Like it's like you go to Iran, you're in an Islamic state. You go to the Vatican, or you go, and it's like where you go. You go to Israel, you're in a Jewish state. It's like where. There needs to be boundaries drawn because I will not live as a Christian man in a psychiatric regime. It's impossible. You can't do it. I'm clearly exploring this scientifically and with intellect, in a civilized, diplomatic way. It's like but there is no transparent reply. Where do you go from there? Where like this? So this is untenable. This settlement is untenable for Christians, right? And whether that means that the Iranian regime moves in, they say finally, then it's like that's where, so it's like there is an intermediary between when people talk about Sharia law and it's so weird because like the psychiatrists can't support Sharia law. How could they? Not on their current modern day thing. And so it's the weirdest thing. It's like you are serving maybe only an Islamic regime by persecuting Christians because Christians are more accessible. Christians are going to fall into your trap of your administration, of your like discrimination, anti-religion, anti-Christian, because we didn't have enough Islamic interaction to develop these things. You've got to understand it developed as an administrative anti-religious concept through the moral grounds of a Christian society, has developed through a revolutionary youth movement and socialist uprising, and now is interacting with a ancient and traditionally barbaric, very, very consolidated religion, and just won't do that. So modern day psychiatrists, they can't interact with Islamic people. They won't know. Islamic people won't voluntarily commit themselves. They won't fall under the ideological spell of the psychiatrists. So they're insulated from it. So you are running a selectively discriminatory religious persecution ring onto Christians, which is benefiting Islamic people via public health care. And that these people are being so highly remunerated that the actual public health care we need is being underpaid. Where do I fucking begin with this? These are the arguments that are spilling out onto our streets en masse. And it's like I can't imagine the arrogance that it would take for this profession to just be sitting there. You're not the judiciary. And I think this is like the judiciary needs to begin disconnecting themselves from the psychiatric community. Like really, like you really need to, like, I'm sure it was, I can understand why it developed, especially if you consider, the alternative of physical incarceration or like, all of the other types of things. It was an easy alternative. But the doctrine that they are preaching under, that they are working under, is a fucking recipe for disaster. It's an absolute nightmare waiting to happen. The moment that I see that shift, I would feel a lot more comfortable in this position. I have no doubts that will manifest via what I do. You need to decouple the judiciaries of all Commonwealth nations from this psychiatric ideology. And there needs to, like, I suppose I could feign a little bit of sympathy for that profession, especially young people, and say, it's unfortunate, but there needs to be a clear exposure of these techniques. It was a useful tool in a inherently racist, discriminatory administrative bureaucracy. It has been floating on the ocean of cultural change and adapting, which is that's what a psychopath does, or a sociopath does. They adapt, they mask themselves and camouflage themselves in whatever, and but the evidence is clear. There's been massive abuse, and to actually see the scale of that, and to I'd say to financially represent that with any state, brings every state of the Commonwealth, every current administration, into absolute bankruptcy. There's no way. You can't. the minute that and that's why I'd say there needs to be an absolute separation between the judiciary and the psychiatric community. Otherwise, you're going to have to basically front a person like me on every single attempt to involuntarily section somebody under these barbaric and outdated and completely obsolete scientific fantasy fucking cults. All right. Thank you for listening. If you got this far, that was a big one. But I feel better with all of that.